Hi everyone, Hugo here, one of the co-hosts of the show. What you're about to watch is a highlight from one of our most recent episodes. To get access to the full version, receive 2 exclusive episodes a month, get every episode 1 week early, and help us stay as independent as possible, support us on Patreon through the link below. Thank you. Now enjoy the show.
What are the ongoing processes of de-dollarization that are currently going on? De-dollarization is like a diesel engine that you try to start in cold weather, and the first 2 or 3 times you tried, it didn't work, but now it's fucking roaring. And I use this example because de-dollarization initiatives were started by 2 countries, particularly in the most sacred of American cows, let's say, and that is the petrodollar, right? Both Libya and Iraq tried and failed miserably to the complete destruction and eradication of their social and political systems and whatnot, to supersede and replace the petrodollar with more equal international systems of accounting for trade in oil, which was a gold-backed petrodollar that is not actually related to the dollar, but instead is based on gold reserves or whatnot. The first example of this was the complete destruction of Iraq. It was one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons for the invasion of Iraq. Iraq at that point had been stockpiling lots of gold in order to initiate the launching of a new currency. Libya had also done the same, and Libya was doing 2 things. They want to do one, a gold-backed petrodollar, and 2, they want to do a pan-African unit currency of trade, basically, to exclude the dollar as well. Both of these attempts were very brave, but failed because the United States simply didn't allow them and used military force to prevent them from getting off the ground. Now, moving on to the third time you twist the fucking key and now the diesel engine roars, that is the bilateral and regional trade agreements that have been happening with the BRICS countries. This means China, Russia, India, South Africa, and Brazil, of course, but specifically China, Russia, India. These are the biggest ones that are playing right now. They've signed trade agreements using their national currencies, which basically means trade without relying on the dollar. Which is significant because, as you can imagine, trade between China, which is the largest population on Earth and also arguably the largest economy on Earth now, and India, with the largest population total and a very fastly growing economy, and Russia, which is a historic industrial power at this point, this is a significant development, them trading outside the dollar. To give you a concrete example of this, the dollar now accounts for 47% of globally allocated foreign exchange reserves. That means central banks have 47% of their currency reserves in dollars. This is down from over 70% in 2001. 70% is an overwhelming majority of assets, right? Now it's 47%. That's in 20 years, right?
The diesel engine has started.
Exactly right. Now here's where we get to the point where it's roaring. The neoliberal and Wall Street favorite rag, Bloomberg, states, and I quote, "De-dollarization is happening at a stunning pace. The U.S. currency's share of global reserves decreased in 2022 at 10 times the average speed of the past 2 decades, as a number of countries looked for alternatives after Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered sanctions." This is the first point that I want to note. At 10 times the speed, meaning in the past 20 years, it dipped from over 70% to 47%. That means over the next 20 years, this dip is going to be even more significant, most likely. To the point that there are White House press briefings about how they're going to try to stop de-dollarization, and it was even a point on Trump's campaign trail.
And we will keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, and it is currently under major siege. Many countries are leaving the dollar. They're not going to leave the dollar with me. I'll say, you leave the dollar. You're not doing business with the United States because we're going to put 100% tariff on your goods.
I hate when countries go off the dollar. I would not allow countries to go off the dollar because when we lose that standard, that will be like losing a revolutionary war. That will be just like losing a war. And we can't let that happen. And too many countries now are fighting to get off the dollar.
Both Trump and Harris, actually, but Trump was a bit heavier-handed on it, which is interesting because this is the first time it comes up during a presidential race. But moving aside from this, another interesting thing is, and this is mirroring this development, there will be over 1 billion new consumers added to the total global market from the global south over the next 10 years. Over 1 billion people would be added to this consumption base, compared to a gradually or more or less stagnant, going on reducing consumption base in the West. Now, increased consumption, generally, of course, means increased trade volume, right? Now, this increased trade volume would not be done in dollars, which would, of course, further weaken the total position of the dollar. This is a significant development. This is a exponential graph, like a logarithmic graph, and we're at the very bottom. We haven't seen it go up into the sky yet. But this is something that's going to really take off, most likely. But moving on, another way of skirting the dependence on the dollar isn't only by not using dollars, it's by also creating alternative institutions for lending that do not use dollars. Now, there's two big institutions for this. The first one is the New Development Bank, which is established by the BRICS to provide financing without reliance on the dollar, financing for international projects. That's the number one. And number two is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which also promotes development, usually infrastructure-based, using alternative currencies. If you realize something very interesting, both the New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank mostly focus on infrastructure development and industrialization. Why? Because that is where actual wealth is generated for countries. If you look at the general investment patterns of Western banks, what do they mostly invest in, right? They invest in financial tools. They invest in fucking moving numbers from here to there and speculating on assets, right? In the United States is a perfect example of this, speculating on real estate and whatnot without actually producing something. And that's why the quality of life is declining. The real wage in the United States is declining, is because there's no actual production being made. There's no actual real investment being made for the most part. Moving on from that, another thing is diversification of bank reserves. This usually means either continuing stocking in central banks, like in China and Russia, stocking gold reserves, or reducing dollar-denominated assets for other currencies. Another thing that can happen, and this is something that I haven't read too much about, but it's many of the economists of the global south are very excited about this. And when Cuba and Venezuela and a bunch of these other countries are very excited about something, I tend to just kind of defer to their excitement, because they know something I don't. And that is the development of central bank digital currencies to bypass dollar-denominated financial systems. This means blockchain-based systems for settling trade and whatnot. I'm not the best educated about this, so I can't really comment further, but it is something that both Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua were super, super, super into, right? From the very beginning, going years back now. And I think this is, when you're in quote-unquote America's backyard, as disgusting as the phrase is, that is to say, it's much harder to skirt sanctions than when you share a border like Russia and China do, right? So as a result, these systems are completely outside the reach of the United States. Their use to settle trade and whatnot, I can imagine would be very, very useful.
And that's why, ironically, like the biggest problem that Western governments and state banks have with the blockchain-based currencies, crypto in general, is, they're not talking about money laundering by, I don't know, narco traffickers that they deal with, or by, like it's just another tool for the extremely wealthy to get even wealthier. On those topics, they're like, crypto is super fucking based. But when it comes to countries that are being hyper exploited by them through sanctions, potentially using this now, let's call it open banking system. Obviously, it's a massive oversimplification. Then it's a massive problem, because you are immediately supporting terrorism. You are trading with countries that are militarily aligned against the U.S., which then brings a lot of legal unnecessary weight to it, blah blah blah. And then that's the shit that they don't like about blockchain. But the other stuff they absolutely adore.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly right. Another point that they're getting into, or the reason for the progress of de-dollarization is, like as I mentioned before, active resistance to sanctions are based in the dollar. Iran and Venezuela, for example, are heavily sanctioned by the US, and they've had to instead use like barter systems, non-dollar trade. Either it's US, they've had to resort to, or have turned to barter systems, for example, like oil for something else, whatever it may be, or non-dollar trade, like China and Russia have been doing. But the point of active resistance to sanction, you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to a very high-up IMF official, who was, I believe, also the head of the IMF at one point, who said, and verbatim, he said, North America and Europe have seized hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets from the reserves of Russia and Iran and Venezuela and Syria and Afghanistan and the DPRK. Many countries are now afraid they could be the next victims. After he listed like 7 fucking countries, he's like, oh, many countries are afraid they could be
unfounded fears.
Yeah, exactly right. So, of course, the next logical step is to speed up the process of this by sanctioning more countries. That's what the United States only does. It's expanding its sanctions list to 20, I believe. And if you count like tertiary and the non-specific quote-unquote sanctions, it's even more than this. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous fucking system.
But that's the eternal European cope of... sorry if I interrupted you. That's the eternal European cope of the European Union thinks that using the dollar, using the World Bank, using the IMF against enemy states is exclusively done to remind other enemy states of what can happen if they pursue, let's say, more independent governance. But why is it cope? Because, my dear European Union friends, it's also a reminder to you to stay the fuck in line as well. Because if you think they're not going to seize your assets or completely fucking crush your economies because even for 1 second you thought of not, following the State Department line, I have a fucking bridge in San Francisco to sell you.
Yeah. Exactly right, and that's kind of the point. It's mafia tactics, literally. Just to scare. It's ridiculous. But they're wearing respectable suits, right? They're even Armani. Oh boy. Anyways, let's talk about concrete progress of de-dollarization. China and Russia are trading in their own currencies now. I think it's over 90% of their trade volume is in their individual currencies. China and Brazil have dropped the dollar in bilateral trade between them as well. The United Arab Emirates are selling China gas and oil in yuan. For example, Southeast Asian nations in the ASEAN bloc are de-dollarizing their trade generally and have been very interested in speeding up this process. They've been promoting local payment systems. Kenya is buying West Asian oil with its own currency, for example. And all of these, each individual example I'm talking about, is billions of dollars worth of trade I'm mentioning. That's billions of dollars worth of trade that are not going in dollars. Think about that, right? That's fantastic. That's because the more you kind of peel away at this nonsense, the more constricted the United States gets in its ability to kind of control the system. I'm going to get onto the long-term consequences of that in a second, but let me just tell you about what the United States is, their attempts at stopping de-dollarization. What are they doing? First and foremost, sanctions and military pressure, the only thing that the United States knows. Trump even said as much. He's like, I will not allow countries to de-dollarize. I will slap 100% tariffs on their shit. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And of course the implication is also eventually military. He's continuing the misunderstanding that if you put 100% tariffs, means all the things that come into the United States will be more expensive for the American consuming base. Is he a fucking idiot?
Like Americans over here Googling what is a tariff.
A tariff is a fucking tax.
That's a meme. That's the meme. That's literally the meme.
Yeah. For the people who are not in the know, just to make life easier, a tariff is essentially a tax on goods coming into the United States from abroad, right? In an effort to prevent them from competing with local economy and local markets and local producers, the United States government puts a certain tax on that and then afterwards allows it into the market. So let's say there's a 20% tax on a fucking, on a phone, let's say. When you go to buy that phone, right, it's the base price plus the 20% tax that you pay as a consumer. And that tax goes to the government to generate certain, in this case, it would be the 20% of tax that generates income to be sent to Israel to kill children, as well as send it into the never-ending hole that is the Ukrainian escapade, the Ukrainian adventure. And, of course, to give tax breaks to the wealthiest in society.
Car enthusiasts look into the chicken tax. There's a reason we got these giant monster truck pickups, and we don't have those beautiful little Chinese pickups.
Exactly right. Yeah, the Chinese and Japanese one's exactly right. And electric cars are the newest one. Yeah. And guess what? The American consumers that have to pay this extra tax means that they pay more money for things that people in other countries pay less to get, meaning that people in other countries have better consumption options just generally, but also if you happen to run a business and this is not like a yogurt that has a tariff on it, but instead like an industrial good that you need for production, guess what? That means people in other countries producing the same shit as you do have now lower expenditures because they're getting the shit cheaper because they don't have to pay fucking tariffs from their governments on these inputs to their industrial production, meaning that you will be outcompeted on the world market, meaning that long term this is incredibly damaging to your, and that's exactly what the United States is doing. They slapped tariffs on over 900 industrial inputs from China, which is so fucking stupid, especially when you consider that Chinese industry is far less reliant on the United States market and US inputs than the inverse, and this process will only continue going to the future.
One last car related thing because I am compelled. The Ford CEO drives a Chinese car. Exactly, and he says he doesn't want to stop driving it. There's if a billionaire is going their shit's better than ours, I'm gonna pay the massive tariffs anyway so I can have this rip to you guys. That should tell you something.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting developments. We need to do a Chinese electric car episode special, and we need to get people some experts.
I have to do a car show. Let's fly to China, business expense, and do a car show on
10,000%.
Yes, bro.
We drive a BYD Seal or whatever the fuck.
Yo.
Just cruise and be like, Sound off if you would like to see that. We'll do a 3-episode special.
Thank you for watching. To gain access to the full episode, receive 2 exclusive episodes a month, get every episode 1 week early, and help us stay as independent as possible, support us on Patreon through the link below.